All right, so we'll say good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Should to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul Haba Aleinu L'Tova. Baruch Meir Rena Dubin for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in honor of our children and all of the suburban sons and daughters beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisroel. May their Torah study and mitzvos in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, the success of our soldiers, the return to their families, and the arrival of Moshiach, tzidkeuni, bimheira, b'yameinu. Amen. Our week of learning sponsors, Josh and Malkie Rosenbloom, and Shalom and Zahava Rosenbloom, the Ilui nishmas, Yisrael, Dovid ben Moshe Hershel, Zichron Levracha. We hope the brother of Rav Gedalia. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family in a chamra. So with that, let us begin. So we'll say, we didn't get to the Mishnah, did we? We did. Look at that. Look at that. Incredible. I know that I owe you a Rambam still. All right, so I'll say, fine, let's begin with the Mishnah. I'm sorry, I know we're getting started a couple of minutes late. So let's begin. Mishnah on Pei Amud Aleph. Halokeach pero shavach mechavero. So we'll say, so now, interestingly enough, what we're doing is we're transitioning a little bit over here to a fascinating case of one who buys produce. Now, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say produce, but one who buys different metaltalin. Now, in this case over here, I'm buying literally the fruit of the dovecote, which means, again, I'm buying doves. So good, I'm buying doves. So let's say I go ahead, I purchase from Ruvain, we'll call it the offspring, or I don't know, maybe what the technical term is, the brood, the chevra, the dovecote chevra. I'm buying the chevra. By the way, I just want to point out to you, I feel like we a little shtickle trailblazers here. Dankala has caught on tremendously. Dankala being a small donkey. I'm just saying it's even making its way in the base medrash in BMG in Lakewood. I'm just saying it's gotten back to me a little bit. So I'm just saying, mamish, okay, so just say it started here. So if you hear somebody using Dankala in the vernacular, just say I know where that started. Okay, and the Gemara says this, Mishnah says as follows. Halokeach pero shavas mechavero. So I'm going ahead and I'm buying doves from Ruvain. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, so now what we're going to see is like this. When you buy something from someone, the halacha is you have to leave behind enough for whatever it is that you bought to regenerate for the purchase, for the seller. So for example, if I go ahead and I buy doves from Ruvain, the assumption is I'm not buying all of his doves. I'm buying some chevra of doves, and then at the end of the day, I have to leave enough over so that his dovecote, his dove chevra could regenerate. So when I buy doves from Ruvain, so what am I leaving behind? Mavriach brecha rishona. So if you look at the Rashbam says over here, Mavriach halokeach brecha rishona maniach lifroach emaim she'osan lo machar shekin derech hamochrim peros shovach la'ake brecha rishona. So when I buy doves from my friend, what I'm leaving behind, literally mavriach means I cause to run away, which means I leave for Ruvain the brecha rishona. Now, in every dove chevra, so like there's the mother and the father, and then again, actually the first Rashbam discusses in depth, we're not going to get into it, but the schedule through which doves go ahead and lay their eggs, how it works, how they birth their young. So when I buy doves from Ruvain, the assumption is I'm leaving behind the mother and father, and brecha rishona means the first couple, the first brood, the first group. That way, again, Ruvain has the ability to repopulate his dovecote after I buy the doves. So the mother, father, and the first unit of offspring are always excluded from the sale. Good. Peros kaveras, no tal gimel nechilim asaris. So similarly, if I'm buying bees, and interestingly enough, this is not buying honey, this is actually buying bees. We'll discuss buying honey in just a moment. So if I go ahead and I buy bees, no tel gimel nechilim, I get included in that purchase are 3 swarms of bees, umisaris. And then I'll say, now we'll have to go ahead and discuss what this means, because misaris literally means like to castrate or to make sterile. So we'll discuss exactly what that means in the Gemara. Chalos tvash. Let's say I'm buying from Ruvain honeycombs, then maniach beis chalos. I buy the honeycombs, but I always leave behind 2 honeycombs in the hive for regeneration purposes. Zeisim lakots. In this case, I'll say I'm buying olive wood, or I'm buying olive trees to harvest it for the wood. Maniach shtei grufios. You go ahead and you leave 2 branches. Leave 2 branches. So the idea of this Mishnah is when you buy these items from the seller, I buy these items from Ruvain, The assumption is I'm always leaving something behind in order to allow the purchased item to regenerate. Good. Let's analyze. Says the Gemara. So it's interesting because in the Mishnah, we say that if I go ahead and I purchase the offspring of the dovecote, so I leave behind Mavriach Brecha Rishona. I leave behind the first unit of offspring. First unit of offspring. The Brisa says you leave behind the first two, not behind the first one. So we'll say this is incredible. Amanav Kahana Lo Kasha, Hala Hali Ima. So we'll say, listen to this. The Mishnah is saying as follows. The Mishnah says the way it works when you buy doves is it's understood that Ruvain is never depleting his dove population. So he's selling me a brood, he's selling me a chevra, but obviously he's going to want to regrow his dove chevra. So what happens? Essentially what's excluded? The mother and father dove, and what we call the brecha rishona, the first unit of offspring. Those mavriach means I cause them to fly away, which is not literal. What it means is Ruvain keeps those so that he can repopulate his dove population, and I take the rest. So the Mishnah, when it says mavriach brecha rishona, is referring to what the mother needs. So the mother, right? We'll call it the mother dove. The mother dove has the father dove, and it also needs the companionship of the first unit of offspring to go ahead and restart the creation of a new dove chevra. When the Brisa says that you leave behind 2 units of offspring, that's because the daughter, we'll call it the daughter dove, right, and her mate, the daughter dove, they need their offspring in order to go ahead and repopulate. So, in other words, the Mishnah is only talking about from the perspective of the mother and father dove. The Brisa is talking about from the perspective of the mother and her mate. From perspective, they also need the population or the unit underneath them in order to go and repopulate. The Gemara says, I don't understand. I'm going to have kana. So alo kasha hala hali ima. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Maishna ima the mitzvasa abarta va'azuga dishavkinale. So let me get this straight. So the mother dove, now, both say, what's absolutely fascinating about this is, apparently, for doves to rebuild the brood, they need companionship. So the mother, so let's analyze this, right? So the Mishnah says, okay, so what does the mother need in order to go ahead and rebuild the brood? What does she need? I don't know, is brood the right, right? Good, it's going to work. Right? So what does the mother need in order to rebuild the brood? She has her husband, and so to speak, her daughter. Now the truth is, the son-in-law is in there also, but we all know about sons-in-law, right? Right? Totally unhelpful for anything, right? So Lemaisa, I don't need that. Let me, because I have sons-in-law. Let me reframe that. From the mother-in-law's perspective, right? So she's like, whatever, yeah, fine, you could come along, right? So Lemaisa, from the mother-in-law's perspective, from the mother perspective, she has her husband, right, her mate, and her daughter. Okay, of course, with the daughter comes along the son-in-law as well. So the Gemara says, now, why do we say ihinami? Why do we say the daughter? Titztafsa a'ima va'azuga deshavkinala. So why do we say something for the daughter? Right, the daughter has her spouse and what and her mother and the mother's mate. In other words, the same way that it's enough, right? The mother needs companionship. The mother dove needs companionship in order to go ahead and restart the brood, restart the chevra. So the mother's companionship unit is her mate and her daughter has her mate. That's the mother. That's the mother's companionship unit. So why don't we say for the daughter, what is the daughter? So the daughter also has that same thing built in. The daughter has her mate and what? Her mother and the mother's mate. Why does the daughter dove need the next brood down in order to feel the companionship to go ahead and repopulate the dovecote? So we'll say, this is incredible and so profound. Ima abarta mitztavsa. A mother is very content with the companionship of her daughter. Barta a'ima lo mitztafsa. But a daughter is not necessarily content with the companionship of her mother. So just fascinating, this idea within nature, that the way it works is the mother has her child, she's totally fine. But for the daughter dove to be able to repopulate and to rebuild, ultimately, again, the companionship of her mother is not enough. The daughter needs the generation below her in order to go, or the brood below her, in order to go ahead and find the courage to rebuild. So quite fascinating. So therefore, again, when the Mishnah talks about over here, that lamaisa, we go ahead, when I buy doves from Ruvain, excluded from that sale is the mother, and we'll call it the unit underneath the mother. That's talking about vis-a-vis the mother. But vis-a-vis the daughter, meaning the unit underneath the mother, she's going to need one more unit below her in order to go ahead and rebuild the dove population, in order to rebuild the dove chevra. Which I will say, by the way, is just such a profound metaphor. Not necessarily in terms of the daughter-mother relationships, and not necessarily in terms of the mother-son-in-law relationships, but in terms of this concept that sometimes when something that you build is taken away, the koach to rebuild comes from the chevra around you, right? Having a support network, having people around you to give you the koach to rebuild is so incredibly important. I will say, this is something very important to be sensitive to as well. That sometimes when a person, Rahman al-Islam, has lost a loved one and they're sitting Shiva, there's an interesting dynamic that during Shiva itself, Baruch Hashem, there's always an outpouring of support. And that's where our communities are structured. If you ask people who have gone through the mourning process, they will often tell you that the hardest part of the mourning process is not Shiva, because Shiva a little bit is like otherworldly. You're divorced from reality. You have the opportunity just to really live alongside your loved one from a memory perspective. Sometimes the hardest part of the mourning process is when Shiva is over. Because what happens when Shiva is over? Everyone goes back to their lives. And a lot of times, the Avel, the mourner, is forgotten. Not purposely forgotten. It's just that, again, when the Shiva minyan was there, when the Shiva was going on, okay, there's minyanim, there's meals, there's this, there's that, there's a lot of coordination, a lot of logistics. The Avel's on everyone's mind. Shiva's over, everyone goes back to life, because the assumption is, the Avel's going back to life also. But sometimes we have to be so sensitive. Sometimes dafka, the time to be there for a person in their aftermath of loss, is dafka when they get up from Shiva, to make sure to make that call a day or two after they get up. Was thinking about you. How are you doing? Sometimes that call, that outreach, is even more impactful than the Shiva visit itself. The Shiva visit, everybody remembers the day after, 2 days after, 3 days after, a month after. When you take the time, because I will say, to rebuild, you really need community. To rebuild, you need people around you. To rebuild, you need a support network. If the doves need it, then al-achas kama v'kama, how much more so we need it. And if we have the opportunity to be part of the support network for someone, again, not of course during the loss, but even a little bit in the aftermath of the loss, a tremendous opportunity to give another human being, to give another person the chizik to rebuild. Let's go weiter. Peros kaveras not to give the chilun saris. So when it comes to bees, if you buy a swarm of bees, or if you buy bees, so ultimately, again, what does it mean to buy bees? You get 3 swarms. Suppose I say now, the Mishnah says like this. So I'm buying bees from Ruvain. So what do I get? I take 3 swarms umesaris, and then we sterilize the bees. So what is that talking about? Peros, kaveras, notal. So what does that mean? Remember, Sarasan. First of all, how exactly do you sterilize bees? What exactly is involved in that? So the Gemara says, Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, the chardal. Interesting, you feed them mustard. So the Gemara says, so what does that mean? Lo chardal masarasan. No. It's not that mustard sterilizes bees. Ella, mitoch shepian chad. So we'll say mustard is spicy. So what happens when the bees eat the mustard? Because it's spicy, chosros va'ochlos as duvshan. They go ahead and they go back and they eat their honey. So the Gemara says, so what is this talking about? Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, umesaris, it's third wide line. Umesaris, kolomar mikan ve'elach yigrom lahem hamocher sheyistarsu me'elehen v'lo yasu od peros k'dei shu trudin va'oskin lasos dvash v'chol she'osin dvash in osin v'lada. So we'll say, this is fascinating. Apparently, bees are very focused. So either bees are mating or they're producing honey but they're never doing both. So the idea over here is, how do you get bees to stop mating? So if you give them the mustard, so they start eating the honey. Once they start consuming honey, that puts them into the stage of honey production. And if they're producing honey, then they are not mating. When they are creating honey, they're not creating offspring. So the idea over here is, if I'm going ahead and I'm buying bees from Ruvain, so Ruvain's going to sell me. So what do you buy? What do you get? You get 3 swarms. Now, after Ruvain sells me his 3 swarms, what's in his interest? Ruvain is going to feed the remaining bees mustard so that they eat honey, stop mating, and start producing additional honey. And that honey belongs to Ruvain, the seller. Incredible. I will say, by the way, what a tremendous Musar Haskell you can learn from the bees. Right? Sometimes in life, if you want to really accomplish something, you have to have singular focus. The bees are either mating or they're making honey, but they're not doing both. We think that we are so accomplished because we're able to multitask, right? And at any given moment, we're able to do 15 things. I will say, we all know, since, I don't know whoever invented multitasking, right? But mamish like Yimach Shemo v'zichro, it literally, again, is the word. Think about, when was the last time you actually gave your undivided attention to something? Right? Because isn't it incredible? You would think, well, on Shabbos I can give my undivided attention to it, but it's not true. Because since Sunday through Friday, I'm so used to multitasking, it's almost as if like my neural pathways have changed to the point that I don't remember the last time I just paid attention to one thing for a prolonged amount of time. Because even if there's not something like a device or something to distract me, I'm still in a million different directions. I can never just do one thing. And I will say, understand, we all know it. You're no more productive. It's just everything I do kind of comes in at about, 75%, 80% at best, because I'm simply not paying attention. I'm not paying attention. There's a tremendous musar from the bees. You know why the bees continue to be around and the bees continue to do it? Is because they have singular focus. When it's time to reproduce, it's time to reproduce. Time to make honey, it's time to... There's no such thing as whatever, I can do both. I can manage multiple things at once. Also, there's a godless. Why? Because I guess the bees recognize that whatever it is that they're doing is absolutely a necessity for the greater universal equilibrium. And when you realize that the greater universal equilibrium needs you to be focused, you remain focused. If only we realized that what we do is also necessary for greater universal equilibrium, we'd be a lot more focused on what it is that we're doing as well. Something mamish to think about, because I will say at the end of the day, we're not being any more productive. We're just doing a lot of things at about 75 to 80% of greatness at most. And that's good. That's good multitasking. That is good multitasking. Lamaisa, the ability to give singular focus to whatever it is that you're doing will make you feel more accomplished, and what you produce will be so much holier and so much better. Incredible. Let's go back there. The Gemara says, fine. Rabbi Yochanan says, what's the second wide line? Rabbi Yochanan says, Notel shlosha nechilin b'sirus. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Sirus over here doesn't mean castrating, or doesn't mean sterilizing. Rather, what it means over here is like this. When I buy bees from Ruvain, I get 3 swarms. Rabbi Yochanan says, you take those 3 swarms in intervals. Sirus over here, the Gemara's meaning, the Rashbam points out over here, like serigin, meaning in intervals. So you take swarms 1, 3, and 5. You don't take swarms 1, 2, and 3, because you want to allow the hive to continue to populate. So you take the swarms in intervals. Okay, Masnisa Tana. Elsewhere we learned, Notel Gimel Nechilin Bazach Azan. Now you can take 3 swarms, one after the other. Mikan ve'elech Notel Achas Umaniach Achas. But after you take maybe the first 3 consecutively, then you only take them on an alternating fashion. Incredible. Chalos Dvash. Maniach Shtei Chalos. So we'll say ultimately, if you're buying honeycombs, so you always leave behind 2 honeycombs, right? You always want to leave behind something in the in the hive to be able to reproduce, to be able to regenerate. So Moshe said it's very interesting. Honey in the comb. Honey itself, even while it's still in the hive, any yotzi midei machal means it does not leave the status of food, which means it's food. It's food. We'll say, now what does that mean it's food? It means it's mekabel tumah. So remember again, food items, normally we say that food items are mekabel tumah, but normally we say you have to have kavana, that now this is a ready-to-use food item. So if Kahana suggests that honey in the comb always has status of food, even while it's in the hive, which is pretty incredible, even while it's in the comb. But Allah Lamaisa, again, therefore it's mekabel tumah. So you see from here that honey does not require what we'll call cognitive designation. I do not have to have in mind that now this is food and therefore it's mekabel tumah. De facto, it's considered to be as food. Interesting. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, we raise the kasha on this. Dvash bekaveres in Allah ocha v'lo mashke. Honey in the hive is not food and it's not drink. So also this contradicts what we just said before. So from here you see that it's not treated like food. So what's going on over here? So Rabbi says this brisa is referring to the two honeycombs that are always left in the hive. Because the two honeycombs are always going to be left for regeneration purposes, and they're not meant to be removed and consumed. Therefore, what? Therefore, Allah Chalamai said they have the status of the hive and not the status of ochel, not the status of food. Incredible. Rava Amar. So Rava says, Amar Rabbi Lazar. So Rava Amar Rabbi Lazar. This reflects the view of Rabbi Eliezer. Sorry, Amar Bezer will say Disnan. Kaveras Torah is fascinating. So we're going to see a fundamental machlokas about the status of beehives. So Kaveras Devorim. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Harehi Karka. Rabbi Lazar says that a beehive has the status of karka, of land. Now we'll say, now what does that mean? Now we'll say, now what this is fascinating. Therefore, the Kosman Allah Pruzbol, let's remember again Pruzbol. Pruzbol means, again, Halacha Maisa Shemitah wipes out all debts. However, again, if you go ahead and you hand over your debts to Beis Din, those debts remain collectible. The only way to go ahead and hand over debts to Beis Din is if the debt is secured by real property. There has to be karka. Rabbi Lazar says, because Rabbi Lazar says that a beehive is like karka, therefore again, halacha l'maisa, if you have a debt secured by a beehive, you can write a prisbal for that debt. Furthermore, again, a beehive is not mekabel tumah, right? Why not? Why not? Because it's karka. Karka is not mekabel tumah. If you go ahead and you remove honey from the beehive on Shabbos, you are chayv v'chatos. Why are you chayv v'chatos? Which malacha have you done? This is the malacha of kotzer. What's the malacha of kotzer? Oker davar mimakom gidulo. When you uproot, no different. If you go into your backyard and you're growing tomatoes and you pull off a tomato from the vine on Shabbos, you're chayiv midaraisa. You've done an act of katsira, harvesting, pulling something up from the place where it grows is one of the 39 malachos. So again, Rabbi Eliezer holds that halacha l'maisa, a beehive is karka. So therefore, if you take honey from the hive on Shabbos, you are chayiv one of the lamates malachos. Shabbos said this is all the position of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds therefore halacha l'maisa again that a beehive is karka. Now, by the way, just before we go on, remember why we're getting into this. We're trying to reconcile a machlokas. On one hand, Rav Kahana said that the honey in a hive is like food, and therefore it's mekabel tumah. The Brisa says that the honey in a hive is not food and is not mekabel tumah. So how do we reconcile the two? Sabai wanted to say they're talking about two different things. The Rav Kahana is talking about general honey in the hive, right? The Brisa is talking about the two honeycombs that you always leave in for regeneration purposes. That's not food. Rava says no. It's reflecting two different opinions. The Brisa that says that the honey inside of the hive is not food. Who is that? That's Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold about a beehive in general? He holds that a beehive is karka. It's karka. Oh, so if it's karka, anything inside of it is karka also. And karka is not mekabel tumah. So therefore Rabbi Eliezer holds that the beehive is karka, the honey inside of the hive is karka, and therefore it's not mekabel tumah. On the other hand, the Chacham say, ain't close another prosbal. So Chacham disagree. So we're going to see the Chachamim hold that a beehive is not karka. Beehive is not karka at all. Rather, again, a beehive is metaltalin. Ain't close another prosbal. Therefore, again, you cannot write, if you have a debt that is secured by a beehive, you cannot write a prosbal for such a debt. Be'enuki karka, umekabel tuma. It's not karka, therefore it's mekabel tuma. Bimkama. Varov demimena b'Shabbos pater. And if you take honey out of a hive on Shabbos, you're pater. You're pater. Why are you pater? Because it's not karka. So because it's not karka, again, it's not an active culture, it's not an active harvesting. Rabbi Elazar. So this is very interesting. Rabbi Elazar says, my time is Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi saying, now here's what's interesting. Now, why does Rabbi Elazar hold that a beehive is karka? Right? It sounds very interesting, right? Because a beehive, I guess, could be on the ground, but a beehive also could just as easily be on a tree, right? There's somewhere else, somewhere high off the karka. Yet Rabbi Eliezer holds that a beehive is karka. Where did he get this? So both say this is fascinating. B'chsiv, vayit ba'osa biyaras hadvash. So I will say, this is incredible. This is talking about in Sefer Shmuel, where again, Yonasan, the son of Shaul, the Klal Yisrael is at war, and Shaul made the soldiers take an oath, swear that no one would eat anything until the battle was complete. Yonasan did not hear about this, and the Navi talks about how he ate some honey. Now look how the pasuk describes it. Vayit osa biyaras hadvash. So ultimately, Yonasan took his staff, and he went ahead and he immersed it biyaros hadvash. Right now, listen now. In this, it almost what it's. Well, let's see. It says now yaros dvash literally means the forest of honey. A yar is a forest. So the Gemara says v'chi ma'in yar esel dvash. Why does the pasuk call honey? What does a forest have to do with honey? So therefore we'll say the pasuk is coming to equate a beehive with a forest. Just as a forest, if you go ahead and you uproot something from the forest on Shabbos, you are chayiv v'chatos, because again, that's the malach of kotzar. Af dvash harov debimena b'Shabbos chayiv chatos. So too by honey, if you remove honey from the honeycomb on Shabbos, you are chayiv v'chatos. So we'll say, interestingly enough, this pasuk in Shmuel goes ahead and serves as the source for the concept that honey or a beehive has the status of karka. Okay, fine. So Gemara says, Meisvei, Gemara is the kasha, Tvash hazav mikabraso, eino lo ochel v'lo mashke. So if you have honey that flows from the beehive, it is not considered like food, nor is it considered like drink. So also, which is another way of saying honey does not have the status of food. That's what the Brisa says. So let's analyze this. So according to Abaye, this makes sense, right? Why does it make sense? Because remember again, Abaye will always answer this up by saying, what does this refer to? The two honeycombs that are always left inside of the hive. So those are never removed, right? They remain there for regeneration purposes. And that's what the Brisa is talking about. Therefore, Allah again, that those are not considered food. Rava kasha. But what will Rava do with this? So the Gemara says, what does Rava do with this? It could be according to Rava, they are talking about honey that flowed out of the hive onto a disgusting utensil. So the idea over here is because it flowed onto a disgusting utensil, therefore what? Therefore again, no one's going to eat it. And because no one's going to eat it, it doesn't have the status of food. Because it doesn't have the status of food, therefore it's not mekabel tuma. Rav Achar Bar Yaakov says it could be that the honey flowed onto splinters of wood. I want to say, what's difficult about splinters of wood? Splinters of wood is, because honey also is thick, you can't gather all of the impurities from it. So because now there are splinters of wood mixed into this honey, no one's going to eat it. So because no one's going to eat it, it doesn't have the status of ochel. And because it doesn't have the status of ochel, therefore it's not mekabel tuma. Okay, beautiful. So Moshe says, Meisvei, dvash mekabraso in Allah ochel v'lo mashke. So the Brisa says, when you have honey inside of the hive, it is not food and it is not drink. So we'll say, halachically, it doesn't have the status of ochel. Chishav alav la'achila. But the moment, again, I will say, you cognitively designate it, right? You have in mind now that you're going to eat it. So ultimately, again, metame tumas ochlin lemashkin, metame tumas ochlin lemashkin, metame tumas mashkin. So we'll say, read that again. Chisha alav la'achila, metame tumas ochlin. If you have in mind to eat the honey, then ultimately the honey assumes the status of tumas ochlin, which means it's receptive to tumas ochlin. Lemashkin, if you have in mind to drink it, metame tumas mashkin. Then it becomes receptive to tumas mashkin. Okay, so let's analyze. So Bishlama Abaye Necha. So we'll say, so remember again, Abaye never has a problem with any of these brises. Why not? Because in Abaye's model, there's always two different categories of honey. What is there? There is the honeycombs, right? The two honeycombs, and those two honeycombs always remain in the hive. So whenever you have a brisa that speaks about honey not being food, Abaye always says, no problem. That's referring to the two permanent combs that never leave. Right? Those don't have the status of food because no one's eating them. Those are going to remain there for regeneration purposes. And when we talk about honey in the hive being food, that refers to everything else. So Abaye always has a wonderful way to answer up any of these contradictions. So Rava's a bit more complicated. El Rava kasha, Amelacha Rava taritzachi. Rava says, here's how I have to interpret the brisa. How do you interpret it? So, right, read it like this. If you have in mind that you're going to eat the honey, ultimately, again, even though you have in mind that you're going to eat it, it still is not considered food, and therefore what? It's not mekabel tumas ochlin. Lamashkin, if you have in mind to drink the honey, it still doesn't become a drink, and einu matami tumas mashkin. I will say, why not? Because remember again, Rava will say, this reflects the view of Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? What does he hold? That a beehive is karka, and because a beehive is karka, therefore what? It's not mekabel tuma. So even if you have in mind to eat the honey, to drink the honey, it doesn't make any difference. The honey ultimately, again, is still not going to be mekabel tuma. Incredible. Tanya Kava say, Rav Kahana, I have a brayso that supports Rav Kahana, Dvash b'kavrasa metami tumas ochlin shalom b'machshava. So we'll say, remember against Rav Kahana is the one who comes along in the brayso that says Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana holds that halacha l'maisa, honey in the comb always is mekabel tuma. Because Rav Kahana is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, honey in the comb is considered food even without machshava, even without cognitive designation, and therefore it is makabel tuma. So we'll say what comes out essentially is, first of all, a fundamental machlokes about the nature of beehives. Is a beehive considered to be karka, or is it considered to be metaltlin? So that's one machlokes. And then again, ultimately, the status of the honey inside, and obviously that is going to have ramification as to whether or not the honey inside of the hive is makabel tuma or not. If you hold the beehive is karka, then obviously again anything in karka is not makabel tuma. Therefore, the honey in the hive is not going to makabel tuma. If you hold this metaltalin, then halacha l'maisa again it can be makabel tuma. But even if it's metaltalin, does the honey need the cognitive designation or not? That's also subject to machlokes. Okay, let's go right there. Zeisim lokotz maniach shtei grufos. So if you remember, if I'm buying olive wood from Ruvain, I have to leave behind two branches so that again the wood could regenerate. So I will say, generally, if I'm buying a tree, but again, in this case over here, really what I'm doing is I'm buying a tree to cut down. I'm buying wood. So I'm buying a tree, I'm going to cut it down, I'm going to use it for wood. I'm buying it from Ruvain. So what is the halacha? The halacha is you have to leave a tafach of the stump. Right? You can't cut it flush with the ground. You got to leave a tafach of the stump so that the tree has the ability to regenerate. Besulas hashikma. So what that means? So besulas hashikma is a sycamore tree that has never been cut down. So what's the halacha? Gimel tfachim. When you could cut. So now I buy all these cases. I'm buying this from Ruvain to cut it down for wood. So you can do that, but you have to leave 3 tfachim of stump. Sidan hashikma, which is a sycamore tree that has been cut down before in the past. Base tfachim, you have to leave 2 tfachim of stump. If I'm buying reeds or I'm buying vines, you have to leave like a knot. We'll say the way the reeds and the vines work is like, it looks like what's a knot in the actual plant. You have to leave a knot, right? You could cut up until the bottom knot, and you have to leave that knot. By palm trees and by cedar trees, once you cut it down, let's say you could cut it down all the way to the ground. Why? They don't regenerate. So remember again, that all of these halachas are, if you're buying these items, you could cut it, you have the right to cut it down, but you have to leave enough to regenerate. By palm trees and cedar trees, they don't regenerate, therefore you could cut all the way down flush to the ground. So is that true? We'll say that a sycamore tree that has never been cut down, when you cut it down the first time you bought the wood, you have to leave 3 tfachim of stump. Is that true? Or minor, raise a kasha. In quotes, it's in besulas hashikma b'shviyas. You can't cut down the besulas hashikma, are you right? The sycamore tree during Shemitah. Why? Because this is considered to be working with the ground. Rabbi Huda says kedarko aser. You can't cut down the sycamore tree in its normal way. Ella magbio yud tfachim v'kotzeitz. What you can do is go up 10 tfachim and then you could cut it down. O gomeim me'ima aretz, or cut it flush with the ground. Now watch this. Now the idea over here is you can go ahead and cut down the sycamore tree in a way, and there's a shemitah. So shemitah, you're not allowed to do any type of positive work with the land. So you could cut down the sycamore tree as long as you cut it down in a way that is quote unquote destructive. What's the definition of destructive sycamore tree cutting down? No, it wasn't good English, but you understand, right? Is if you go ahead and you cut it flush with the ground. Right? So you cut it flush with the ground. Me'am ha'aretz hu dekashir ha'idach ma'alila. So it sounds like over here, the only thing that's destructive, in other words, when can't the sycamore tree regenerate when you cut it flush to the ground. But it sounds like as long as you leave a little bit, it can regenerate. That contradicts what we said before. We said before that for the sycamore tree, it needs 3 tfachim to regenerate. But here it sounds like it needs even less than 3 tfachim. So what's going on? To which the Gemara says, Amrabaye, Gimel tfachim malila, me'ama aretz vaday kashila. So here's what's interesting. If you leave 3 tfachim, that is definitely beneficial. If you cut it down flush to the ground, that's absolutely detrimental. Mikan ve'ilach lo makshi kashila v'lav ma'ali ma'alila. So here's what's interesting. Essentially, if you leave 3 tfachim, we know you're good to go for regeneration. If you cut it down to the ground, ultimately again, it's not going to regenerate. Between going ahead and let's say flush to the ground, a little bit above flush, and 3 up until 10, ultimately again, or really between flush and, or a little bit between flush and 3, lo makshi kashila, it's not detrimental, but at the end of the day, it's also not beneficial. Gabi shvius, so when it comes to shmita, avdinan midi devade kashila. Now, both say, in shmita, in order for you to do something with the earth, it has to be destructive. So therefore, if you need the wood of the sycamore tree, you could cut it down, but you have to cut it down in a way where the tree definitely can't regenerate. How do you do that? Cut it flush to the ground. When it comes to mekach umemkar, when it comes to selling something, so obviously the goal over there is halacha l'maisa, to go ahead and do so in a way that is beneficial. In other words, I'm buying the wood, but I don't want to put the seller at a disadvantage, so that's why I have to leave him 3 tfachim of trunk, so therefore again his tree could definitely regenerate. Beautiful. So we'll say this is actually beautiful. Listen to this. When it comes to a palm tree and a cedar tree, so there, if I bought it from Ruvain and I want to cut it down, I could cut it down flush to the ground. It doesn't matter why, because these trees don't regenerate. So the Gemara says, Ve'erez in Gizon Machlif, is that true? Is that true? The cedar tree doesn't regenerate. I will say, get ready for this. Vaha Darish Rabichia Bar Lulaini. Rabichia Bar Lulaini says, Ma'idich Siv, Sadik Katamar Yifrach, Ki Erez Balvanon Yiska. No, is no one amazed by this? Erev Shabbos. Kabbalah Shabbos. We're going to say this tonight. Sadik Katamar Yifrach, Ki Erez Balvanon Yiska. Incredible. No, how does this happen on a 7.5 year cycle? On a 7.5 year cycle. 7.5 year cycle. Right? And if you don't know that we sing that phrase, you're davening at the wrong minyan for Kabbalah Shabbos. Right? But I say, so nice. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that absolutely incredible? Erev Shabbos, Kabbalah Shabbos, Tzadik Katamar Yifrach, Ke'erez Balvanon Yiska. So we say, Tzadik Katamar Yifrach, literally again, the righteous person, Katamar Yifrach, literally will sprout, will blossom like the date palm. Ke'erez balvanon yiska. And so the Gemara says, Im ne'emar tabosai. So now obviously it's referring, it's a beautiful pasuk because it's comparing the tzaddik both to the palm tree and to the cedar tree. So the Gemara says it's beautiful. The Gemara says, Im ne'emar tamar lama ne'emar erez. If at the end of the day, why do you have to compare it to both? Or why do you have to compare the tzaddik? In other words, we'll say, when we read this pasuk, what do I get out of the pasuk? That the tzaddik is like the tree. The tzaddik is like the tree, right? And the tree is tall, the tree is strong, the tree has roots, the tree has branches, right? So why do I need both the comparison to the date palm and to the cedar? Look how beautiful this is. So the Gemara says, Nemar tamar lama ne'eres, v'im nemar eres lama ne'emar tamar. Ilu ne'emar eres v'lo ne'emar tamar. If it would have just said the tzaddik is like the cedar tree and not like the date palm, hayisi omer ma eres in oseperos, af tzaddik in oseperos. I would have thought like this, that the cedar tree, I will say, as strong as the cedar tree is, it doesn't produce fruit. So So I would have said, the tzaddik is like the cedar tree. Just like the cedar tree doesn't produce peros, so too the tzaddik doesn't produce peros. Now what does that mean? The Rashbam points out over here, Af tzaddik inosa peros, she'ochel tzidkosa ba'olam hazeh, ve'ein lo bi'olam haba. Inami, shil machilin also pri ma'alalov. So we'll say, I would have thought like this, maybe a tzaddik is only able to affect good in this world, but doesn't have the ability to affect good in the world to come. Or maybe the tzaddik only impacts himself, but he doesn't impact anyone else. You know what I said? The greatest peros you have in this world is the ability to have an impact on another yid. Sefer would have just said a cedar tree. I would have said the cedar doesn't have fruits. So just like the cedar doesn't have fruits, so the tzaddik is strong and mighty himself. But maybe the tzaddik has no impact on anyone else. Therefore, the Gemara says, I'm sorry. It never. So it never. Therefore, the pasuk compares the tzaddik to the tamar. The tamar creates fruit, right? The date palm creates fruit. And therefore, again, the tzaddik is not only great and mighty in and of himself, but first of all, the tzaddik generates zechuyos in this world and in the world to come. And in addition to that, the greatness of the tzaddik is that he has the ability to impact himself and the ability to impact others. Then ne'emar tamar, v'lo ne'emar eres, and if it would have just said the date palm, but not the cedar tree, hayisi omer, I would have said ma tamar ein gizo machlif, just like the tamar, right? The date palm. Its trunk doesn't regenerate. When you cut down the date palm, it doesn't regenerate. Af tzaddik ein gizo machlif. Maybe when the tzaddik falls down, he can't regenerate as well. Therefore, lekach ne'emar eres. Therefore, the pasuk says eres. Therefore, the pasuk says cedar tree. So I will say, so to teach us what? That even when the tzaddik falls down, Sheva Yipol tzaddik v'kam. No matter how many times the tzaddik falls down, no matter how many times his trunk is cut down, the tzaddik always has the ability to regenerate, just like the tamar. So I will say, look how beautiful this pasuk is. Tzaddik ka tamar yifrach ke'eres bavano yiskeh. The tzaddik is like the tamar, is like the date palm. In what sense? Even when he's cut down, even when he fails. I'm sorry, just the opposite, right? The tzaddik is like the tamar to say what? The tzaddik has peros. The tzaddik has peros, that the tzaddik, the greatness of the tzaddik is that what he does matters in this world and the next world. And whatever the tzaddik does impacts himself and impacts others. Ke'erez ba'levanon yiskeh. But the tzaddik is also like the cedar tree. Namely, that just like when the cedar is cut down, it has the ability to go ahead and regenerate, so too the tzaddik has the ability to regenerate as well. It also gives us what is the definition of a tzaddik. The definition of a tzaddik is threefold. Number one, a person who is constantly and perpetually working to strengthen himself. Number two, a person who produces peros. Doesn't just live for himself, but figures out what can I give to others. And number three, a tzaddik is someone who, when he fails, finds the koach to regenerate. When my tree is cut down, I figure out how to regrow myself. Those are the three ingredients for the tzaddik, all learned out from the tamar and from the eres. Now, both say, now for our purposes, to come back down to earth, the Gemara says, no, what's going on over here? But we just said before that the eres doesn't regenerate. All right, both say, I'm going to leave you on the cliffhanger for that. Stop here for today. So we'll have to see again how to reconcile the arazim. The Rabbi say, what is chus to going to Kabbalah Shabbos night tonight when we sing that phrase, how we're going to appreciate it in such a profoundly different way. And halavai, we should all be zochim to activate the three ingredients to becoming a tzaddik and live lives of profound tzidkah. So I'll say, shkoyach. All right, good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.